4 months before the 2020 election, a secret military exercise was held to simulate the removal and ousting of Trump. This was not a game for entertainment, ladies and gentlemen. This was a preparation for the use of force if it became necessary to arrest the President of the United States. These were carefully planned and rehearsed tabletop operations. It seems with the knowledge that Trump would discover the election was rigged, he might refuse to leave the White House. None of Trump's staff, no one from the White House, no one from the administration or members of Congress or the Senate knew about this. It was purely a party matter watered down. True, there were some Trump haters from the Republican Party, like the disgraced and ousted former chairman of the Republican Party, Michael Steele. He previously wrote a very positive review of my book, for which I am very grateful. Formally, the project was presented as protecting the integrity of the elections and the peaceful transfer of power, but in reality, more than 100 participants were shown, discussed, and rehearsed the outcome in advance. How to ensure that the courts would not take up cases about election fraud? What levers, media, street thugs, local law enforcement could actually be used? This, of course, was a rehearsal for scenarios to remove Trump. Adding to this, neither before nor after did anyone organize or play such games. Especially without the participation or knowledge of the country's leadership and the oversight bodies of the Senate and the House of Representatives. That is, the deep state was rehearsing what to do if and when Trump remained in power, whether he formally won or formally lost the election, and even if he formally won. The participants tried to maintain the appearance of neutrality, and that's why they also simulated the scenario where Trump wins and Democrats like Black Lives Matter riot. And what should be done? So, in the scenario where Trump wins, they played out the option where he stays in power and drains the swamp, meaning he specifically goes after them and their accomplices.
So 5 months before the election, the top circles of military intelligence and political power in the United States all gathered together and conducted a secret war game to find a way to use unrest, nationwide riots, and to provide services to the Black Lives Matter movement so that they would owe them favors to get them out on the streets against Trump if Trump won the election fairly and squarely. But what about them? They also needed a reason to put Trump and his family in prison, and they needed a reliable, deliberate, and concrete strategy to go after the networks that helped bring Trump to power. Because they won't automatically demobilize when Trump leaves office. They don't belong in this country, and they can't stay here. We need a way to arrest them en masse.
This is Mike Benz on Saturday, detailing much of the conspiracy that brought Joe Biden to power. A group that most people have never heard of was involved in this, the Transition Integrity Project, and I share Mike Benz's obsession with their war game. June 2020.
Part of the conspiracy that pushed and shoved Biden into the Oval Office. This is Barbara Boyd. She's a publicist and investigator who has collected and is still collecting a lot of materials about the conspiracy aimed at decapitating Make America Great Again and putting the movement's leaders and Trump himself in prison, or even get rid of them altogether.
I'm Barbara Boyd, and I've been writing about this event since August 2020. I checked, I'm also a co-author of the police dossier, It's the British Who Are Killing Our Presidents. To get your copy, follow the link in the description. Today, I'll first talk about the main participants in this scheme and their shocking open plan to undermine the 2020 election. Then I'll explain how the election was rigged. 4 attempts to imprison Trump and destroy his entire movement, which began on January 6, all stem from a meeting of the conspirators in June 2020. Finally, I'll show you excerpts from Donald Trump's speech at the World Economic Forum in January 2020. That's why the enemies of this nation decided long ago that Trump and Trumpism must be eliminated.
It was a speech that made the globalists unite in their effort to destroy Trump and Trumpism. And what is Trumpism? It simply means my family, my country, my morals, my beliefs are what matter most to me. And it's expressed in the phrase America first. At the same time, for example, when talking to Argentina, for you it's Argentina first, and we understand that perfectly, and that's how it should be. And for you, it's Ukraine first. And that's normal too. And I don't want to interfere in your life, so please don't interfere in mine either, and so that you don't get tempted to do so. I will have the strongest army in the world.
On Saturday, I talked about Michael Anton, the author of Trump's revolutionary security doctrine. Anton exposed Kip's war game when it was being conducted. He rightly said that they were planning a coup against the election, and their public war game was meant to normalize this idea in the minds of the public. For this insight, Niels Gilman wrote on Twitter that Anton deserves the kindness of being shot.
That is, for exposing the conspiracy, he should be shot. Well, if it's bipartisan and not against Trump, and you've been saying for so long that it's just for democracy, then why shoot him?
Rosa Brooks started as a lawyer for George Soros at the Open Society Institute, then moved to Bill Clinton's State Department to conduct regime change operations, and later worked for Obama as a lawyer and Deputy Under-Secretary of Defense for Policy at the Pentagon. All this time, she was a full-time law professor at Georgetown, one of the country's leading law schools. That's why I'm not surprised where our current radicals come from. The Vietnamese ones were Ni Uffy and Kitis. Later, the Vietnamese presidents came to Kites Storm Vai Party L.
What are these ways? Well, I suppose the 25th Amendment means that he's crazy or sick, then impeachment. And I also assume there's a palace coup, which may or may not include the assassination of the president.
She, of course, rejected the idea of waiting until the next election and winning it. Instead, she advocated for the 25th Amendment and impeachment. Both of these options, of course, were tried during Trump's first term and failed. The fourth idea, by the way, which isn't mentioned in the headline, is a military coup. She concludes this 2017 manifesto with it. So, for the first time in my life, I can imagine a plausible scenario in which senior military officers could simply say to the president, "No, sir, we won't do that." To the loud applause of the New York Times editorial board, this is being said by the lawyer of the third most influential person in Obama's Pentagon. You might ask, what role is she playing now as the Democrats foolishly repeat the same game? In June 2020, Brooks Gilman convened a war game about the 2020 election and its potential consequences. It had more than 100 active participants and 76 role players. Among them were former officials from the Pentagon, the intelligence community, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, the media, as well as the Republican and Democratic parties and their institutions. In short, the corrupt Washington establishment. Although some names were made public, such as John Podesta, Donna Brazile, Bill Kristol, Michael Steele, Jennifer Granholm, and many others. Of course not. They were all against Trump. All of them, like Brooks and Gilman, were major players in the attempt to overturn Trump's 2016 election and overthrow the government. Mike Benz describes the various war games within the Transition Integrity Project exercises very well. I'll just focus on their conclusion. The rebels concluded that in order to prevent Trump from getting a second term, Biden somehow needed to secure a huge lead in the election and overcome the obvious sense of fraud. In all their scenarios, including overturning Trump's victory, they need to control the Black Lives Matter militants, Antifa, and similar street rioters. Well, Black Lives Matter received $90 million in 2020 from donors like the Democratic Alliance and the Ford Foundation. And Mark Elias, the lawyer who actually led the first coup, was responsible for all their financial reporting. And the military? On August 11, 2020, Defense One published an article by retired colonels John Nagel and Paul Yingling openly calling for a military coup. On August 18, Defense One developed this topic further, calling for it to become a subject of reasonable discussion within the armed forces instead of immediately rejecting the idea of a coup. Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was not going to obey any order from the president to suppress the uprising.
The top ranks of the United States military were ready to break their oath and obey the demands of their own establishment. That is, those who built the mechanism for brainwashing and robbing the people, us and you. They were ready, with weapons in hand, to go against their commander-in-chief, the Lord. That's how they defend their own gruel. To be continued, and it will get even more thrilling and frightening. In the meantime, you still have 20 days left to write off any amount from your taxes. Whatever you donate to us, it goes to a non-profit organization called the Science of Fiction Foundation, which has the right to give you Americans. Of course, I mean a tax deduction. And of course, hit the bell, subscribe, and share with your friends, because what is told on this channel, Well, I've never seen anything like this anywhere else on the Russian-speaking internet.
He was already openly rebelling against Trump in June 2020. So on Saturday, I got several comments asking where to find the national security strategy I was talking about. It's on the White House website. But if you subscribe to our newsletter, we'll provide you with all the research that supports what I'm saying. If you haven't done it yet, go there and subscribe now. The link is in the description.
My recommendation for those who can listen and read in English is to subscribe.
It discusses the issue of bringing Trump to criminal responsibility even after he leaves the presidency and about his complete destruction. Quote, white racist and extremist base, end of quote. In a broader sense, a reliable, targeted, and concrete strategy is needed to counter the networks of white supremacists and extremists who contributed to Trump coming to power and in turn received support. Of course, the same goes for Russia, and of course it happens in and what is in, and of course about what is in. About what is happening in Russia, and of course about a lot is needed by Russian America. They claim to claim. In 2022, they sought to eliminate huge parts of the Republican Party's campaign headquarters, spied on 10 current senators, and persecuted Trump's supporters in at least 4 cases. Just like their current European counterparts, these Democrats smeared the electoral majority that opposed them not as citizens, but as white supremacists and extremists. If you recall the institutions where, according to the document, they need a coup, the Justice Department, the Pentagon, and the mobilized radical base they control, it becomes clear why Kash Patel, Don Vigiano, and Pete Hegseth are so relentlessly persecuted, even by those who claim to support the president. And that's exactly why Antifa was allowed to run wild and grow since the summer of 2000. The only other institution you really need here is the media. But hey, they were already completely treacherous when Trump came down that escalator in 2015. So what causes this hatred toward Trump and Americans? Frankly, on January 21, 2020, President Trump went straight into the beast den at the World Economic Forum and presented the same spiritual agenda that's in his book. I'll just play you 2 clips and you'll understand my point.
She says that in 2021, Trump had already thought out a strategy that has now been presented to us as a finished, well-developed document. Specifically, Trump's Doctrine, which develops the Monroe Doctrine and turns it into something that fits today's technologies and today's world, into something we can use as our country's doctrine. Actually, it's insanely simple. Its meaning is that the United States will not do to anyone what we wouldn't want someone to do to us again and again. A return to the brilliant Rav Gilal and his golden rule, the golden rule of people living together in society. Isho Anotri, whom you call Jesus Christ, repeated it 100 years after Gilal, though in a slightly different form. So, you could say that what Trump has just put forward is a continuation and development of Judeo-Christian philosophy, now applied to the politics of the greatest country on planet Earth. Let me repeat that again. I really enjoy saying it. The greatest country on planet Earth.
Now is not the time to give in to pessimism.
It's time to show optimism. Fear and doubt are not the best mindset, because now is the time for great hope, joy, optimism, and action. But to embrace the opportunities of tomorrow, we must reject the eternal prophets of doom and their predictions of apocalypse. They are the heirs of yesterday's foolish forecasters. And I have them, and you have them, and we all have them, and they want us to have them, but we will not allow it. They predicted an overpopulation crisis in the 1960s, mass famine in the 1970s, and the end of oil in the 1990s. These alarmists always demand one thing: absolute power to dominate, change, and control every aspect of our lives. We will never let radical socialists destroy our economy, ruin our country, or take away our freedom. Centuries ago, during the Renaissance, skilled masters and workers looked upward and built structures that still touch people's hearts to this day. To this day, the greatest buildings in the world were built hundreds of years ago. In Italy, the citizens once began the construction of what would later become a 140-year-long project, the Florence Duomo, an incredible, truly breathtaking place. Although the technology to complete their vision did not yet exist, the city fathers moved forward anyway, confident that one day they would find a solution. These citizens of Florence recognized no limits to their lofty ambitions, and so the Great Dome was eventually built.
Edison tested 7,000 different materials, and according to other sources, 25,000. But I'm even afraid to say it until I've found the carbonized bamboo fiber. Editor, and later on to tungsten. This is called the spirit of a pioneer, and if you have this spirit, then dams are built and light bulbs shine.
This is a tradition of optimism, of creation and exploration of all new horizons of human knowledge, all of which was laid down by our founders. It's in our blood. They understood that oligarchic imperial interests were destroying that Renaissance tradition in Europe, a process that almost reached its terrible apogee. Today, under the conspiracy law, it is necessary to prove it. Under the conspiracy law, they reached an agreement and then committed criminal acts. I agree with Mike Benz. The agreement was reached during the June war game, and the obvious actions included the rigged election on January 6, 2021, 4 prosecutions of Trump and his supporters who challenged the election, as well as an attempt to dismantle the president's constitutional control over the military. An investigation is long overdue, but we haven't taken any action against the participants to bring charges.
Remember, I told you that Pam Bundy is preparing a case against the deep state, meaning the Democratic Party of the United States of America. And now this military conspiracy to overthrow the legitimate government has been added to the case. Not long ago, John Solomon, another journalist, I told you about him, showed you, quoted him. He is probably one of the best investigative journalists in America. Today he said that around New Year's, either before or right after it will happen, as he said, there will be stunning data about the activities of the deep state. I think that's what he was talking about, if there's anything else, but I don't know. I think that's exactly what he was talking about. That's all. Goodbye until next time.